Lived around the corner-ish, and there was one night I got a bunch. I was gonna hang out with a friend of mine who didn't use it. We hung out a lot. She didn't use it at all. And this time, there's one particular night we weren't hanging out. So I said, "Oh yeah, all right. I'll get a bunch. I got a couple bags of heroin," and I did some. And when she called while I was at home, and I said, well, it'd be, to hang out. And I said, it'd be good to hang out, but the problem is I just did a bunch of heroin. And she said, well, never mind then. I said, no, it's all right. I'm not one of these, real dopey people on it. I don't keep falling asleep or whatever. I function. I can function on it, but I'm just really high. So I ended up. So I said, all right, well, we'll meet at this club downtown. But I didn't want to take any with me because I thought it would be rude, and I didn't want to just keep going into the bathroom to do it. So I just took it all. And when I got in like the G over on L train over on Graham, that's where I was going from over by the BQE. I was walking down the street. And I got pretty much to the train, I don't know what street it is. There was a deli. There wasn't much there at that time. It was it was a neighborhood. It wasn't rough. It was just dark, There weren't many people around. And when I got just about to the deli that's over there, I started to OD. I knew I was ODing. You could feel it sort of happen. I mean, not all the time, but I just snorted the stuff, so I could feel it happening. And so I went into the store, and it was winter. I went into the store and bought just some bottles of water, and went out, took my clothes off, and jumped in the snowbank and dumped water all over myself to get cold, because it's sort of like.
That worked?
Yeah, it worked. I mean, I was pretty high, but it worked. And I said, okay, this is better. I got dressed. I went to get on the train to go into the city. But I decided it would be better to take a cab instead, which I didn't really want to do because I didn't have much money. I certainly didn't have money to take a cab into the city, but I did anyway, because I figured, I don't know if something's going to happen again. If something happens again, at least there's somebody else there.
You're not in the subway.
Yeah, because there was nobody on the trains then. On the L train, nobody ever took the train. You could be the only person on the car at 8 o'clock at night. So I decided I would opt for the cab instead, so if anything did happen, there's at least somebody there to, I don't know, figure something out other than myself, So I wasn't stuck on the ground.
You were okay after that?
Yeah, it was pretty alright after that. That's the only time I ever remember ODing. I don't ever think I did it before. I'd gotten really high before and really sick. Set a bed on fire once. Me and this ex-girlfriend were laying in bed. We got in some really, really good stuff. I was living upstate then, though. And the guy told me, the guy that sold it to us, he said, be careful, because the stuff's really, really strong. And bags were a little bit bigger than normal. So we took just a little bit. And where I lived in the apartment, there's a long, you'd enter the apartment, there's a really long hallway that got to sort of the main part. There were a couple of rooms off the hallway. But I remember just crawling. I was going to be sick, which wasn't terribly uncommon, and crawling all the way down the hall, trying to get into the bathroom to be sick. I made it. It was just very difficult to get there. But then later we were hanging out in the bed, because you could fuck on it as long as you didn't shoot up. I could anyway. I don't know if other people could, but as long as you didn't shoot up, you could fuck on it. You just can't come, which is fine. You didn't really care. It's not like coke where you give a fuck, you can't come, but it would irritate the shit out of you, or could. But with heroin, you just didn't care. You just have sex. But at some point, we're in the room listening to music and nodded off with a cigarette and woke up and the bed's sort of like, oh wow, the bed's on fire. But that wasn't really an OD. That was just typical. Not setting the bed on fire, but being that high was just typical of the drug. That was a really good bunch of dope.
So, how did you stop?
I decided that, I think the last night I did it, I sort of realized that I didn't really want to do it anymore. I mean, I had a good time. We were doing needles that night, but I was gonna. It's really cheesy, but I just decided that, there was someplace else that I would rather have been with somebody else that I would rather have been than doing that. You know what I mean? So I said, I don't really want to do this anymore. So I just stopped. I never bought it again.
How long were you doing it?
About 5 years maybe, off and on. It wasn't like live in the park junkie style or anything like that. I mean, it was just, you go on like these little binges, buy a few bags and just do it for a while, And then when it was gone, you'd stop. So you got the urge and you'd do it again. It was a good drug. But lose interest in it, I suppose.
Yeah.
At least I did. Parts of it. I mean, every now and again you still think about it. It makes sense to do once you're older. I think that's what's the most interesting thing about it. It doesn't make sense to do when you're younger, because then you don't want to do it when you get older, because you've done it. And you can't do it again, or whatever. It makes more sense to do when you're older, when you're like my age. And you've got bills and you have to work. It's much more appealing to just start taking it and forget about it. Live the rest of your life high, because that's when it fucking matters. Because when you're a kid, you don't give a shit, and you can do all sorts of things. Not a kid, but you know what I mean. You're younger. It makes more sense to do that. But you're not thinking about it. You don't really have anything to worry about anyway. You just go to clubs and bars and you have a good time. But it's when you're older and you wake up and you're like, oh Jesus, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. It's much more appealing, the idea of becoming an addict, I think. Just wake up and say, I don't really want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to make money. I don't want to have to figure out rent. I don't want to have to figure out any of this. It'd be just easier, and it's, I think, more appealing that way than when you were younger, or when I was younger. Makes more sense to do then.